I call this oversight hearing to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs hearing. I'll note that several of our colleagues are in other committee hearings and briefings right now, so we anticipate that they will join us, but I think we'll go ahead and kick off with the opening statements from both the chair and ranking member, as well as those who've come here to testify, and hopefully they will filter in a timely manner for us to be able to include them in the questioning part. I'd like to start by welcoming the veterans, both at home and here in this room, who've joined us for this hearing today. Caring for veterans is a top priority of this subcommittee, and today we're here to ensure that Bluewater veterans receive the benefits and care that they're entitled to under the law. Our Vietnam-era veterans waited for too long for the VA and for Congress to provide the critical disability and health benefits that are due to them as a result of Agent Orange exposure. Thankfully, that wrong was righted with the bipartisan, unanimous passage of the Bluewater Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019, which I co-sponsored. That act goes into effect January 1st, 2020. I'm holding this hearing now to make sure that the VA is planning for success and doing everything it can in the meantime to help veterans covered by this law. I invited Dr. Paul Lawrence, the Undersecretary for Benefits at the Veterans Benefits Administration, to this hearing to address VA's progress and planning for Bluewater Navy implementation. Disappointingly, the Undersecretary declined to attend and did not give a reason for his inability to attend. I would say that his absence is notable and concerning today, and it would have been helpful for Dr. Lawrence to have been here today to answer our questions, address our concerns, and let us know what, if any, additional resources the VA needs to implement this law on time for our veterans. We've also heard from our VSO partners that the department is failing to fully collaborate and share information with them. They identified a stonewall at high levels of the department that reduces transparency and ultimately hurts VA programs and veterans. I'm sorry that Dr. Lawrence is not here today to personally address at this hearing those concerns of our VSO partners who we will hear from later today. One common objection from veterans advocates is the Secretary's stay on all claims covered in the Bluewater Veterans Act, including Bluewater claims, Children of Thailand veterans, and Korean DMZ veterans. I'm concerned that this stay is overreaching and causes undue delays. While I appreciate the department's efforts towards preparation, including the mapping tool that they've created using naval deck logs, I question the need for a blanket stay. And I know that we spoke earlier, Mr. Clark and Ms. Murphy, and perhaps there is a misunderstanding between that and the VSOs, what they're observing and what you're implementing. So perhaps we can clear that up as part of the questioning today. I'm also troubled with the news that VA has not accounted for submarines when deploying the mapping tool for Bluewater. The law and the committee report clearly outline that veterans who served on any vessel within offshore waters is presumed to have been exposed to Agent Orange. The committee reports state that vessels below the water are also included. But even so, submarines often surface and would have done so within the offshore waters of Vietnam. VA has made some progress in preparing for implementation of this act, but I hope that we'll hear more today about the VA's plans going forward. For example, how will VA implement training for newly hired raters? How will VA utilize the hub processing centers? Indications to this subcommittee are that some regional offices and medical centers remain unaware about the upcoming changes to the law. And will the VA adjust the employee production standards to account for complicated Bluewater claims, which could potentially entail reviewing decades of medical files? The committee has many questions, and we believe the VA has much work left to do. This work is far too important to veterans and to the country. We see this as an opportunity for our VA representatives here today to let Congress know what, if any, additional resources and support that you need to successfully implement the Bluewater Navy Veterans Act as of January 1st, 2020. And I now recognize Ranking Member Mr. Boss for his remarks.
Thank you, Chair Luria, and thank you all for being here today to discuss the VA's implementation of the Bluewater Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019. This law extended the presumption of exposure to the Bluewater Navy veterans. Now these veterans will qualify for the same benefits as their boots-on-the-ground and brown-water Navy comrades. The Bluewater Act took years of hard work from members on both sides of the aisle to finally get this bill through Congress and to the President's desk. But our work didn't stop when we did that, when we got it signed into law. As Congress, we have a responsibility to ensure that the VA successfully implements the Bluewater Act on January 1, 2020. And between now and January, the VA has a lot of work to do. Rest assured, I am committed to working with the VA and the VSOs to ensure that the veterans who file a claim under Bluewater Act receive timely and accurate decisions. Accordingly, for today's hearing, I would like to discuss the efficiencies VA is developing that will help it process these claims more efficiently so that these veterans can finally receive their benefits that they earned so long ago. For instance, the VBA is creating an IT tool that will help claims processors determine if the veteran served in the offshore waters of Vietnam. That being said, this tool is not a replacement for having well-trained claimed processors. Sometimes technology fails us, which is why employees need accurate guidance to avoid any potential pitfalls, IT or otherwise. It's important the Bluewater Navy veterans and the veterans receive correct decisions the first time, and it's imperative that the VA personnel are adequately trained by January 1. Therefore, I'd also like to hear about the training the VA is conducting on Bluewater claims. And finally, I'm interested also in receiving an update on VA's progress executing the additional provisions in the Bluewater Act that would extend the presumption to veterans who served in or near the Korean DMZ beginning on September 1st, 1967, provide benefits to certain children of Thailand veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange, require VA to identify the U.S. military bases located in Thailand where Agent Orange was used and when it was used, and also to provide an update on the current research on the potential in-service toxic exposure of Gulf War veterans. I'm so glad that we are quickly approaching the day when VA will be able to start granting claims to Bluewater Navy veterans. These veterans have been waiting decades to finally hear VA acknowledge that their health challenges were in fact caused by the time these warriors were serving in the defense of our nation. Again, thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to having a productive discussion on the VA's implementation of the Bluewater Act, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bost. For our first panel, we have Mr. Willie Clark, who's the Undersecretary for Field Operations at the Veterans Benefits Administration, and Ms. Beth Murphy, Executive Director of Compensation Services at the Veterans Benefits Administration. So I would like to start with allowing you, Mr. Clark, 5 minutes for comments.
Good afternoon, Chair Luria, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you to speak today on Veterans Benefits Administration's plan to implement Bluewater Navy, or BWN, Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019. Joining me today is Beth Murphy, as you mentioned, Executive Director of Compensation Service. Today, I will provide an update on how VBA is preparing to process disability compensation and survivors' claims as a result of the new law and what resources will be required for implementation. The new law provides that a greater population of veterans are now presumed to have been exposed to herbicides such as Agent Orange and may be entitled to service connection for conditions related to that exposure. VA appreciates the authority Congress provided to stay pending BWN claims until the law takes effect on January the 1st, 2020. The stay is enabling VA to operationalize the new law to ensure proper resources are in place to meet the anticipated workload demands, develop appropriate policies and procedures, and create the necessary tools to adjudicate claims timely and accurately under the new law. One of the tools we are developing under the stay is called the Ship Locator Tool. This tool, which will mitigate risks associated with developing these cases, will enable our claims processors to shave months off of the normal development time. I will speak more to this special tool later. VA is committed to ensuring all veterans and beneficiaries covered under the BWN Act receive the benefits they have earned in a manner that honors their service. This is particularly important for our ailing and aging BWN Vietnam-era veterans. I am confident that awarding these claims will begin on January 1st, 2020. VA is committed to providing priority processing for claims of veterans who are homeless, experiencing a financial hardship, terminally ill, and age 85 and older. VBA is executing a comprehensive project management plan to process BWN claims timely and accurately. VBA has issued interim guidance to the field for the handling of existing and incoming BWN claims. We continue to refine policies and procedures, which will be finalized prior to January 1st, 2020. Mandatory training will be delivered to experienced claim processors at 8 regional offices by December 13th. We have chosen to limit processing to these 8 ROs because they've experienced working Agent Orange claims and with retroactive benefits aspect of dealing with those types of claims. It is vital that we get the funding requested to implement this new law so we can hire claims processors with adequate time to provide training so they can backfill behind the experienced employees. We have developed a robust communications plan for both internal and external stakeholders. This includes partnering with VSOs who we meet with monthly and who have provided great feedback and advice on our comms plan. We are publicizing the Act through press releases, newsletters, media, and other digital platforms. As part of this effort, we recently sent targeted outreach through direct mailings to over 77,000 veterans and survivors who submitted claims that were previously denied. VBA's deck log scanning effort will provide VBA claims processors with tools to efficiently identify vessels that meet the definition of the new law. Along with the Navy History and Heritage Command, VBA collaborated with the National Archives and Records Administration, which has entrusted VBA with the care of their archival records in the form of deck logs. We are managing a contract to scan and extract pertinent data from deck logs created over a 13-year time frame. These data are being incorporated into the electronic ship locator tool, which will be utilized by claims processors. These deck logs are comprised of millions of images, and scanning them up front will save claims processors from having to submit individual case-by-case requests for these records. In cases where the tool does not confirm eligibility, such as for classified missions, service on submarines, fire-related records that have been lost, a special team will do deeper records research to confirm eligibility. VA appreciates Congress's consideration in appropriating funding, which will enable VA to successfully implement the BWN Act. Beyond funding for benefits payments, VA needs resources to hire, train, and support additional claims processors, scan deck logs and veterans records, and modify IT systems. VA is committed to ensuring all BWN Vietnam veterans and their survivors receive the benefits they have earned under the BWN Act. We understand the gravity of this initiative and are committed to getting it right. We have a comprehensive implementation plan to operationalize the requirements of the new law, and we are currently on track to begin awarding benefits on January 1st. VA appreciates the support of Congress and this committee and continue to care for our nation's veterans and family members. This concludes my testimony. I'll be happy to entertain any questions from members of the committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Clark. Also joining us today, we have Dr. Rowe, who is the ranking member of the full Veterans Affairs Committee, and I'll recognize you, Dr. Rowe, for 5 minutes for an opening statement as well.
Thank you. I want to thank the chair and ranking member Boss for holding the hearing, and I would like to say that I think the Nats got a lousy call last night down the first baseline. As a veteran, as a Vietnam-era veteran who served in Korea, today's topic is very near and dear to my heart. Passing the Bluewater Navy Act was the right thing to do for our nation's veterans, but now we must ensure that VA implements the law the right way. A lot of our Bluewater Navy Vietnam veterans are suffering from conditions known to be associated with exposure to Agent Orange. Their benefits are long overdue, and they're looking at us to make sure that our country does not fail them a second time. As Ranking Member Boss stated earlier, we're committed to ensuring that VA does not wrongfully deny these veterans the benefits they've earned. So it encourage VA to work with Congress and stakeholders on this matter. VA has tremendous work ahead of it, and we are here to lend a helping hand. That being said, we will closely be monitoring the implementation of the Bluewater Act as it proceeds. I'm especially focused on VA's plan to analyze deck logs that will allow the department to determine which veterans served in the offshore waters of Vietnam. And just having said that, I think back to my own experience with boots on the ground. I don't know that I could prove where I was in Korea. I think I know where I was stationed, but we were in the field, we were out. It would be very difficult. And on a ship, thank goodness I was never on a ship, Mr. Clark, but I like the ground. But floating around where you can't see land doesn't do me any good. And I think relying on those logs is extremely important to prove. Because if you're in a submarine, I've spent 1 weekend in a submarine. That was enough for the rest of my life. You don't know where you are, so you're relying strictly on that. Fortunately, the Navy keeps great records, and hopefully you'll tell us in your question and answer period, do we have access to all those records? And it should be, if we do, that should be fairly easy to nail down, I think. That being said, successfully confirming that the particular ship entered the offshore waters of Vietnam is only one piece of the puzzle to award benefits to our Bluewater Navy veterans. These veterans still have to meet the same other eligibility criteria as boots on the ground and brownwater Navy veterans. That is, the ship being in the right spot is one part, showing that the veteran was on that ship is another part. One of my concerns is how VA will address any challenges that may arise from records that were destroyed in the 1973 fire at the National Personnel Records Center that might have provided the information needed to establish that a veteran was on a particular ship while it was in the offshore waters of Vietnam. I hope that today VA will provide us with assurances that no veteran will be denied benefits without proper development of their claim. Additionally, many of the Bluewater Navy claims will be particularly complicated because of the potential retroactive benefit involved. As a doctor, I know that conditions change and evolve over time, and frequently patients develop secondary conditions. VA will need to account for a veteran's changing disability picture as it assigns evaluations, including ratings that have increased as time has passed. Lastly, I fully expect on January 1, 2020, the Secretary will lift the stay. Consequently, I would like to get VA's commitment that it will have the information technology training and guidance necessary to begin awarding benefits for Bluewater Navy claims on 1 January 2020, and I think we have. I would also like to renew the inquiry in the letter that Chairman Isaacson and I sent to Secretary Wilkie on September 19, 2019, asking whether there are any exceptions to the stay for veterans in extreme circumstances, such as veterans diagnosed with terminal and aggressive Agent Orange-related diseases who may not have the luxury of time. These veterans are undergoing an unfathomable hardship and deserve recognition from VA during their final moments that their illnesses may have been caused by their military service. However, we must not forget the concerns of other Vietnam-era veterans who are worried that they may have been exposed to Agent Orange. For example, we know that the Department of Defense sprayed herbicides in Thailand, but the extent of that spraying is unclear. For that reason, we included a provision in the Bluewater Navy Act that instructs the VA to work with DOD to determine exactly when and where Agent Orange was used and then report back to Congress with results. We have a lot of Thailand veterans who need answers about their potential exposure to herbicides. I would like for VA to confirm that this review has started and confirm that it will meet the 180 deadline in the report. Again, thank you, Chairwoman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. I look forward to discussing the current status of VA's implementation of the Bluewater Navy Act, and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rowe, and thank you for joining us today. We will now move on to questions, and I will first recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to start with Mr. Clark. We're only 63 days away from January 1st when we'll implement the Bluewater Navy legislation. And earlier you mentioned that you hope to process Bluewater claims using specifically 8 hubs, but have not yet determined those locations. You also told me that you're still, finalizing the training for employees, which to me infers that it has not yet started to be delivered to those employees. Considering the complexity, the volume of these claims, and the short time, 63 days remaining between now and January 1st, how do you plan to finalize these locations, conduct the training, ensure you have the right personnel on hand to be successful in the rollout starting January 1st?
I'll begin, and then I'll ask my colleague to join in. But we, again, appreciate the opportunity for the stay. And the stay is enabling us, and we are on schedule to be ready on January the 1st. What we're doing right now is several things, myriad things and many. The first of which is we've got 28 million records of these deck logs that have to be scanned and placed in this tool so we can use that as a confirmation that veterans were in the 12-mile nautical area seaward. That tool, and it's not done, we're still doing load testing on it and the like, but that tool is not used to deny individuals benefits. It is used only to get to yes, to confirm. Any cases that we cannot definitively say with using the tool, then we have a group of individuals that will undertake development to go through and look through records, and which we do now for other types of cases, other Agent Orange related cases for boots on the ground and the like. So that's one of the things we're doing. We've got to finish policies and procedures, and my colleague here, her team is working on that aspect of it. Training is slated to begin and be finished the first 2 weeks of December. So once we get that training, which consists of about 2 days of specialized training, because understanding we're limiting the individuals doing this work to 8 regional offices. Those 8 offices are offices whom we used to or currently working Agent Orange type claims, number one, and they have experience with dealing with retroactive aspect of benefits for Agent Orange claims. That's why we selected those 8.
Just to clarify a little bit more, then these 8 particular locations already have specialized teams that have been more focused on this type of claim than the wider range of over 50 offices across the country?
Well, all 50 offices are working Agent Orange type claims and a multitude of other type claims. But these offices have individuals that work retroactive aspect of AO claims.
So you've done an
underneath.
analysis to find the
We've done an
people you think are the
analysis.
best suited for these complex
And that's
claims.
why we
Yeah.
selected those eight
Okay.
regional offices.
Great. Well, we're a little bit limited on time, so I wanted to make
Yes.
sure Ms. Murphy had time to comment on
Yes.
this question as well.
Yes, if I could push my button. If I could add to the list of sorts of activities that need to be synchronized, all brought together during this stay period. We've, in addition to the policies, there are the parallel procedural elements in our manual that tell the claims processors how to track the claims, what end products for routing and tracking, reporting are assigned to each claim. We mentioned the training. We also have a service center manager conference twice a year where we bring together all of the heads of the claims processing divisions from all over the country for training and best practice sharing. We have one of those already scheduled for the week of December 8th, so we'll have all of our claims processing leadership in one place to have a deep dive refresher and get ready for this January 1st. We've had to develop communications, press releases, website information, frequently asked questions, all of this that's available. We had to draft the outreach letters. We worked closely with the veteran service organizations. We sat down with them and asked them to help us review the letters, make some wordsmith changes, make sure we didn't miss anything, because the veterans and the survivors who read these letters, they're working closely with them, and you know, they know what they need in these letters. So we made some improvements based on that. I think the outreach is very important because the law requires folks come in and file a claim to be eligible for these benefits. So we want to make sure that we're using our time to get the word out as well, so folks come in. And other than that, hiring, research, getting the call center scripts for our phone agents prepared, a lot of risk assessment, dashboard reporting, analysis preparation. So there are a lot of things that are coming together in a short period of time, but based on our integrated project plan and all the different work groups that have different pieces of this that they're working on, it's coming together and we're on track for January 1st.
Well, thank you. And I just wanted to reiterate, pick out a piece of what you said for anyone who might be watching this hearing at home specifically, is that a veteran will have to submit a new claim under the new law. So there are veterans, I think you referenced earlier, somewhere around 70,000 who have previously submitted claims for this and been denied.
Yes, ma'am.
And they should be receiving a letter in the mail.
The letters have been going out this week to the 77,000 previously denied veterans or their surviving spouses who have claimed these benefits with the appropriate form in the letter so that they return that to us.
So, but if anyone watching this perhaps
Absolutely.
is in that circumstance, maybe they've moved, maybe they don't get the letter in a timely manner, they can reach out to the VA or through a VSO to get all of this information because they should be able to submit claims. And you've also estimated that from our previous conversation, there's roughly 400,000 people. So there's a lot more people who may have never submitted a claim who also should know about this change in the law.
Absolutely.
And you're making efforts to get that word out to everyone.
Yes, and we rely on you and your offices and the VSOs and our other partners in the veteran community to get that word out because it is important. We want to make sure we make whole and pay everybody that we can that's eligible, but they do have to come in and make themselves known to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I know that I ran over on my time, so I'll now recognize Mr. Boss, the ranking member, for 7 minutes, since that's how long I took.
So, Mr. Clark, we know, and I want to thank you first off in your testimony where you said that you are not going to be using the tool to get to know. The tool is just to affirm, and so obviously there's going to be times that that tool does not work, either because the records aren't in or some kind of problem that could happen. If the claim can't be granted through that verification tool prior to the denial of the claim, will the VA contact the veteran, inform them of additional evidence that they can find and get together, and what might that evidence be that they can search out? I know we've had this conversation about how hard it is sometimes with our records.
Great question. Thank you for that. The answer is yes. We'll contact the veteran survivor and let them know that while we continue to do additional development to go back to places that have records, military records stored, which we typically do when we can't corroborate whether a veteran was at a particular place where they had said that they were at. Dr. Rose spoke to that earlier. So in addition, though, to our doing development, we do go back to the veteran and ask if you have any buddy statements, we call them lay statements legally, or anything else that you can send to us that will help us get you to yes. What we're trying to do is grant as many of these as we can. And so the tool will shave off months of what would typically take maybe upwards of 9 months or so to do this development typically. But with the scanning of the deck logs, 28 million of these, once they're in the tools and this ship locator tool, we're confident that that's going to address the lion's share of the BWN veterans coming in. But
Okay,
if that
and then
doesn't
you would
work,
explain
we'll
to
get back.
them at that time all the items that they could. It's kind of like the checklist of things. Would you have a letter? Would you have a buddy? Would you have someone that can verify you were there?
Yes,
correct?
we will do that. And again, we look for our VSO partners. These letters that we're talking about, we have worked with our VSOs to say, take a look at what we're doing and certainly receive any advice and consult assistance in getting that word out. But we specifically go to each of them and let them know what is needed to help them develop their claim.
We know the turn-up date is January 1, but do you know what date you're going to start testing and have everything loaded in the tool so you can start getting it tested and online?
The tool is slated to be done the first week in December. We'll have training done not later than the 13th of December.
What's your backup plan if it doesn't work?
The tool?
Yeah.
Well, it's working.
Okay.
We are looking, we're putting data in, but we don't have all of the data in yet.
Okay.
So, but what we'll use is what we currently use these 800 people that we're hiring, and didn't get to say that as what we're also doing as part of the stay. We're hiring processors to backfill the experienced processors that we're using to work these BWN claims. But that's what we use, the old-fashioned way of going back and requesting records to try to help veterans place them where they say they were, or to find records that corroborates their story to help service connect them.
So I was a little concerned with what the chair actually said in her opening statement about, are we going to get the problem straightened out on the subs? That the subs were not in the original tool, is that correct? It was, I think that statement was.
Submarine records are not, but we're working to get those in. But what we're doing is as part of that development action that I spoke to, if someone is not in the tool, fire-related cases, they may not be, those records may not be in the tool. But we have a construct that says if this is a fire-related case, these are the steps that we go through to try to help corroborate those stories, which again speaks to buddy statements, lay statements, and several other things that we use to help get to yes.
So while you're in the stay, is there any cases that are actually being worked on at all in advance?
No, because our folks are not trained to do this work. What we have 12 individuals that are working on this ship locator tool. We're getting the records scanned. We're doing tests to see that, checking the load of the system, making sure that the few million records that we have in there right now, that if we can extract data, that the system does not fail on us, and the like. So all of that is part of the procedures and policies that Ms. Murphy's team is working on, because again, we want to make sure that we get it right. We have learned, historically speaking, that we have rushed sometimes possibly to start doing things, and we just can't afford that with these individuals. They're aged, and we want to get it right the first time.
And we want to make sure you get it right, because, and this is me speaking just because I've been here 5 years, and there's been many a thing that has come before us, not only on this committee, but in different committees that I serve on, and we're promised a date, and the date comes, and all of a sudden there's not the delivery. And this is not one that we want to see that happen with. I understand, your team understands how vitally important this is. These people have waited too long. We've finally got the legislation in place, and we need to be moving forward with it. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Boss. I will now recognize the chair of the full Veterans Affairs Committee, Mr. Takano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Luria, for holding this very important oversight hearing. Mr. Clark, you said in your written testimony that VA has adopted an evidence-based approach for verifying the locations of Navy ships and determining the veterans' eligibility under law. But you know, many veterans, like those whose records were destroyed at the fire at the National Personnel Records Center, those records may not be available. How do you plan to develop these claims, or claims that might arise from veterans whose records were burned there?
We have a protocol, and I'll let Ms. Murphy speak to what that is, but we have these types of claims for other veterans as well, that because that fire unfortunately destroyed many veterans' claims. So we have a Reconstruction Protocol, which again goes back to the veteran to ask him and her on dates, times, individuals, anything that we can to help corroborate them, and we can go and Ms. Murphy, I'll let you speak to the other things, but we do have a protocol.
Yeah, Mr. Clark is spot on. There's standard operating procedure to reconstruct records to the extent we can, find out who the veteran may have served with. We can use other records, lay statements to place people in different locations. And I also wanted to mention that as far as the process of loading the data into the tool, Mr. Clark mentioned the 28 million records that need to be scanned. These records are unavailable to us right now. They are on trucks to high-speed scanning locations so that they can be ingested into the tool, extraction done from the necessary data points, the latitude and longitude elements on those records. That populates the tool. So in many cases, the development we need to do, we can't even put our hands on those deck logs until the scanning is done. We've scanned about 4 million of those records so far of the 28 million. The first are the hardest because you have to set the machines up and work through the paper issues, but we're scanning about 1 million a day. So we're on track to make sure that's available. And as far as some of the other records, the unavailability of records, sir, that you're mentioning, there are classified records. Most of the submarine records are classified. We have individuals amongst our employees who have top secret clearances. We go to them on a regular basis for information and help us to research these. These will be treated as special cases. The bulk of the claims processors will be working on the bulk of the cases. We will be able to say, yes, they were there, yes, they have the condition, and yes, we can pay them. But we will treat these unavailability type records specially.
Well, thank you. Mr. Clark, as you know, Bluewater claims will take significant work, especially as the VA considers staged ratings and retroactive payments. Are you planning on augmenting the production standards in order to ensure that these complicated claims are adjudicated correctly?
Mr. Takano, the answer is yes. Now,
I'm very pleased to hear that.
I
I have a follow-up if you said no, but
No, I won't say no. But the thing is that what we do for all types of claims is to take a look at our employees and the amount of work that they do for the types of claims. If we see that these claims are taking longer, we will give more credit. Now, that's not something that we can do in a day or two. But once we see, and this again is part of a process that we have in reviewing the output for our employees.
well, as I said, I'm glad to hear it. You said VHA would provide updated guidance to enrollment staff on how to verify service in Vietnam. What training and guidance was given to healthcare staff, and can you verify that all healthcare facilities have received it?
I'd have to take that for the record, yeah, because
Okay.
VHA, I'd like for them to speak to that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I hope you'll get that answer back to us. I appreciate your coming in today and answering our questions. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. Now recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Clark, my understanding is that Bluewater Navy veterans who may be eligible for retroactive benefits under the law are encouraged to file a supplemental claim. In contrast, Bluewater Navy veterans who have never applied for benefits related to Agent Orange should file an initial claim. How will VA handle any Bluewater Navy claims that are filed on the incorrect form?
We will correspond back to said veteran and let him or her know, either the veteran and or the survivor, that this is the proper form that you should use for your particular case. If we have previously denied a case of which we sent out, as Beth mentioned a second ago, over 77,000 outreach letters, and in fact, that just for individuals that were previously denied. In that letter, we said these are the type, this is the type form that you should use to come back into us. Again, working in concert with VSOs to try to get that information out, working with your offices. But if they call the call centers, our call center agents have scripts that they understand how to tell or instruct one to what form to use. So we are prepared to be ready on 1 January. We will be ready without fail.
You've answered part of the next question. You know, some veterans may not have remembered. It's been so many years that they even filed a form. And for those veterans who filed an initial form, I could see how that confusion could occur pretty easily and cause a little hiccup in getting their claim adjudicated. So I think paying attention to that, because many have, I'm not sure how many actually provide, and you all may know those numbers of how many have applied previously. And I don't know whether you do or not. I guess the question I have, if I come in and put my claim in, I file the claim, and then you're gonna take this ship locator tool so you can figure out where that ship was, and then you've got to figure out, was I on that ship? Am I correct? Did that ship get inside the statutory requirements of the law? And then were my feet actually on that ship or submarine? It could be a submarine. I can assure you they don't, if you're riding around the submarine, I had no clue. I was under the polar ice floe. That's all I knew in the North Atlantic. So, and that may be all the crew knows at the time, because it's a need-to-know basis where you are. But if you can get that information, then how long should it take after that? Because that seems, if that tool works and you can prove you're on that ship, that should be a fairly, and you have a presumption, a lymphoma or
Right.
type 2, whatever the 12, 13, 14 presumptions are, how long should that take?
Dr. Rowe, that's a great question, and this is why we love this tool so much, and this is why, again, the stay, which we're appreciative of you allowing us to have the stay. Once we get all these records in, if we can place an individual that says, I was on the USS, whatever the ship was, the deck logs contain the coordinates where that ship was. All deck logs record this at 3 different times a day, 8 a.m., 12 p.m., and then 8 p.m. And so once we go through and we set up like what they call it, a paragon, that actually is an area that says this ship was in this particular location, they're in. Once they're in, and you adequately explained this during your initial brief, that gets you in, that says you were in, we're going to concede exposure. Next, now you have to have medical evidence that establishes that you have a condition, a diagnosis for one of those presumptive conditions. Once we do that, we have promised, our boss has said, we're going to rate these claims just like we do the others, no more than 125 days. And presently, we're less than 100 days. So we are working feverishly. We're going to have all of our employees working on the 1st. Both Beth and I will be working as well, 1st of January I'm talking about. They'll be working overtime because we will be ready on the 1st. We will be issuing decisions on the 1st. We'll be serving veterans on the 1st.
And Dr. Rowe, just if I could quickly add, the more complex cases that you alluded to earlier that go back over periods of time for potential retroactive benefits, those can be a little more complicated because we have to go look for some of the decades of records, medical records that may be relevant, including from private providers. We have a contract that supports turning those around in about 10 to 12 days, so that helps. And then we also need the personnel records, the service treatment records. Sometimes we have those in the file because then we say, okay, this service member in their military records shows that they were on this ship. We go to the tool and say, yes, type in the day and the coordinates. The ship was where it was supposed to be. Then, do they have the condition? How long have they had it, and how has it progressed over time? Yes, sir.
2 other things very quickly is, one, I think it's also important to get that report on Thailand out. I had one of my best friends I'll ever have on this earth die of a very rare lymphoma. The perimeter of his base was sprayed with Agent Orange. And then just lastly, an editorial comment is that I remember when our battalion commander came in, I'd just gotten in Korea, and he said, if an all-out war breaks out here today, there will be 80% casualties. And I held my hand up and I said, sir, where are we? I didn't even know where I was. So a lot of veterans are out there. They don't know that they're where they place or not. And I think your ship locator is going to be a great tool to be able to verify. Much easier for the Navy than for the Army, I think. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rowe. And as a follow-on, Mr. Clark, I'd like a follow-up, and perhaps you can provide this information to me after the hearing. If I'm understanding you correctly, out of all of these deck logs, you're only taking position reports from 8 o'clock and 12 o'clock reports? Those are the only positions that you're taking as far as the navigation of the ship during the course of these 13 years?
Under our present guidelines, it's 3, 8 a.m., 12 p.m., and 8 p.m. So it's 3 coordinates off of the deck logs.
And not 12 a.m. when they start a new deck log for the new day and have a position report?
It'll be 8 a.m. the following day. And again, this is another reason that we are still working through this. We were asked if we're ready. We're not, because again, now you bringing this to the forefront. We've got a team.
Because I
that
certainly know
worked-
that a ship navigating within 12 miles of land takes a position report more than 3 times a day.
We can take that back for the record. I'll let Ms. Murphy speak to that, but that's the procedures that we were using, 3 coordinates, 3 times, 8 a.m.
That's an internal VA policy that you've established?
Well, that's the data that's available on the top of the deck logs, so that's what.
So you're only using the header on the deck logs?
Yeah,
You're not using
ma'am.
all of the data contained therein?
Both. So for the big picture, plotting where the ship was, the movement of the ship, we're primarily using those lat longs at those 3 points in the day. That will get a bulk of the folks into yes. A PDF of the whole deck log is included and embedded in the tool as well. So if those coordinates won't answer the question, we can bring up the actual PDF and read the narrative in the deck log as well. That's why we'll go fast as much as we can on the ones that are based on those three times a day coordinates. If we have to go deeper, we will go deeper and do all of the additional development before we say no.
Okay. And then lastly, I wanted to follow on again to Dr. Rowe's comment, because we've gotten feedback from the VSOs specifically that people, veterans who are trying to submit these claims, are just very confused. And do we really need to quibble over whether they're using an old form or a new form, or having them resubmit forms multiple times? I mean, what can we do to make this as smooth as possible? When you have a veteran walk in, they don't remember if they submitted a claim 20 years ago, or perhaps someone did it on their behalf at a VSO quite a while ago, and they submit the wrong form. Do you really think the burden needs to be on them to go through the process of you mailing them a letter back, they fill out a different form, mail it back in? I mean, at what point and level of frustration after 40 years do people need to actually get these benefits?
Right, and we do acknowledge that that can be complex. I mean, our whole claims process can be complex. We're delivering a
So
wide
can you
variety of
say,
benefits.
can you just say that you can look at your policy and get back to us? Is it possible to take either form for these claims?
Ma'am, it's based on the changes that came from the Appeals Modernization Act, so those requirements were built into that act, and it flows from there. That's why we did the risk mitigation of sending the letters to the previously denied with the appropriate form to make sure that we had the best opportunity to get the right form in. If they do send in the wrong form, we have a standard operating procedure in place to go back to them, send them the right form, ask them to send it back within 30 days. They can call the call centers if they have any questions, reach out to VSO.
So basically, you're putting it back in the veteran's lap because they submitted the wrong form and they don't know any better.
Ma'am, we're following the law, and
So are you telling me that the Appeals Modernization Act tells exactly which form, number, version, series,
Yes,
date
ma'am.
that the person has to submit?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, I would like to see that as
We'd be
soon as
happy to-
possible,
we'd be
because
happy
I
to talk.
seriously doubt that in the law, we spelled out versions of VA forms. I think
Well-
those are internal forms that you create.
There were different
administrative
categories
purposes.
of claims created. If someone had been previously denied and comes back in, then there's a requirement for a different form. We'd be happy to go into
A
a deep
requirement for
dive.
different form, or a requirement for you to be tracking them differently? So putting the tracking burden on the veteran rather than you to just say this goes in this pile rather than this pile?
Good point, ma'am. We'd be happy to talk further
Okay,
about it.
my goal in all this and the feedback we've gotten from VSOs, and, I went to a VFW in my district and heard frustration from veterans about very similar things, is that they feel like the burden is always put back on them, and they're just the end user. They don't know that there's different forms out there.
I hear you, ma'am, and
So
we
we just wanna
understand. We don't want to make it
Make
any
it
more
as simple as
complex either.
possible. So
We'll take that back for the record
will
and get
take
back
it
to
back.
you.
yeah, thank you both for
Thank
that.
you.
And to my colleagues, I apologize. I ate up a little bit extra time, but now we'll be moving on. And Mr. Cisneros, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Clark, I just want to follow up on what you said when you, what you stated earlier about getting the information out there or starting this. You said it was going to be at 8 hubs or 8 regional offices where this is initially going to be happening. So are they going to handle claims for the entire country, these 8 hubs, or is it only specifically for their regions?
No, these are, as called for in the law, there are a certain number of hires that we stated to Congress that we would need to process these claims. We are in the process of hiring 800 individuals to do that. Now, we're using experienced people to do this work. 800 experienced people. The ones we're hiring are backfilling. We will start with that number. We've got a universe potentially of 400 people that may file claims. It is not the thought that many will come in.
Wait,
but if
a
they,
universe, only 400 people you
no,
expect?
I said 400,000. Did I say 400 people? Oh, my goodness, yeah, 400K, not 400 people. So sorry about that. So, but we have data that shows that much less than that will come in. So what I'm doing is limiting that to a small number of regional offices so that if we glean that we're making errors, if we feel that there are some changes that need to be made, rather than contacting every regional office and having those individuals to do that work, we're limiting it to 8 people. Now, we're mindful of timeliness. So we will meet or exceed the same timeliness, and I spoke to this a little earlier. Right now, we're averaging less than 100 days to get claims completed. So once we get an affirmation from the tool, if we can't get an affirmation, then it goes and we do some additional development. But once we get an affirmation, we'll be able to just go pretty quickly because we need a diagnosis and we need a medical evidence.
Yeah, but I'm still, the answer I'm looking for is if you have these 8 regional offices that are handling claims, if I don't live in this specific area of these, is my claim still going to be handled?
Of course, because see, our claims, we deal in electronics. So what happens, we send digits to regional offices. We don't send paper. So when we send the claim, we send it in an electronic format. Those individuals, and again, we're monitoring the amount of the inventory, how quickly claims are going out, and if we need to add more resources, we will do so because we understand that we're dealing with a population of individuals that have served this great country that are aged and they're disabled, sick. So we know we have to get these claims done quickly.
All right, and I believe you said the training program will start around December 13th?
We'll be finished on December 13th. Now, these are trained individuals, Mr. Cisneros, that they already know how to complete
claim.
Agent Orange claims.
Okay, got it.
Believe it or not, I did them
Right.
back in the day. I won't go back to when.
So the
but I
only
did.
additional training they really need is on this,
The retroactive, the tool, and then we need to shore up on the retroactive aspect of paying out because as Beth said earlier, if an individual was previously denied, we have a situation where an individual may have been married a couple of times. They may have had cancer that may have regressed, and then it came back again. So we've got these staged ratings. So these decisions can be very complex. So that's the training component we need. 14 hours, less than 2 days. We're going to start it on the 2nd of December, be done on the 13th. We have some tests in mind that we're going to do to make sure that they get it. If they don't get it, we're going to pull cases that they rate. We'll get the 8 ROs together. And again, now we're talking about 800 people, but that way these individuals rate enough cases that they can become very proficient at doing this work.
All right, I got 30 seconds left, so I just want to ask this real quick. As far as outreach to VSOs, do you have a plan to outreach to the VSOs, and what is that plan?
That plan is we meet with the VSOs monthly. We have been for the last few months. We continue to work with them, and we are asking them to help get the word out. We have outreach, our regional office directors, town halls in the community and the like. So we have an aggressive and a comprehensive plan to make sure, starting with the outreach letters, the 77,000, to make sure that we get the word out and working in concert with the VSOs to make that happen.
All right, thank you.
And sir, if I could do a quick public service announcement, I went myself onto the va.gov website, and I just wanted to go in and find the fastest way I could get to this information. So I went last night to the va.gov website. I went to the search box at the top, and I typed in Bluewater Navy, and the first item that came up, it was right there. There's a
Yeah.
lot of information, so I would encourage people to
I
look
get it.
there as
My,
well.
my father's a Vietnam veteran. He's 70
Understood.
years old, and he doesn't really use the internet. So
Right.
that's not really going to do
Right.
him much
But
good.
he might have a smart son who does and who can help him with that. So we're trying to get the word out any way that we can.
Well, he's
sir.
still looking for that smart guy. All right, well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cisneros. I'll now recognize Mr. Bilirakis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it very much. And what about television? I'm from the old school too. Television, radio announcements, public service announcements. For those that don't read their emails or go on the internet on a regular basis, have y'all thought of that?
Yes, we have a comms team and a sub-work group that is considering all of those different options. Twitter town halls, I know, again, those are for the kids of, or maybe grandkids of, but public service announcements, certainly we'll have more conversation as it gets closer to get the word out about other modes of delivery of that information, but
Okay, so now,
no
in other
wrong
words,
door.
and you said that you wanted to involve members of Congress, their staffs as well.
Yes.
And that's great. Is there a plan to train some of the staff? And how far, is there any flexibility as far as how far the staff can go to help the constituent with the forms and all that?
Certainly,
Because I know we're limited in some capacity in some areas, yeah.
we have some toolkit materials that we can provide to all of the offices. I know sometimes when you're going back to your districts, you might have a package of information that you could share. We'd be happy to share some outreach materials that you could pass along, the tools, the link to the website, any and all of the information.
Yeah, and, put it on our Facebook page, that's important,
Yeah,
too.
that's good.
I hate to stay, but if it's necessary, our Bluewater Navy veterans have waited too long, and I know it was in the legislation, but we want to get it right, obviously. So let me ask this, in this regard, can you tell me how long VBA plans on tracking and reporting the accuracy of the Bluewater Navy claims?
We have particular tracking mechanisms, different claim labels and end products that we have for all of these different categories. Bluewater Navy being one of many, many that we do. And we can do special reviews. We're going to set up a process to do quality reviews as we're getting ready to pay some of the first claims. We'll be giving feedback to the stations, holding calls every week, maybe every day at the beginning. We'll have a VA Pulse page available to the claims processors in case they have any questions. As part of the claims processing, my team, the National Quality Team, will be looking at categories of these, subcategories of these. The local quality teams will be doing targeted reviews. So we'll be doing this for some time over the years while we're processing these claims as they come in.
Okay, so you're not anticipating any type of a shortage with regard to FTEs until, I know you made a request for new FTEs for fiscal year 20.
Correct.
But you think you have enough now that will be trained adequately to get these claims submitted? And when you go from, say, January 1st, and it's an uncomplicated claim, say an easy claim, what have you. I know in regular claims, it's anticipated 125 days. Give me an average, roughly, how long you anticipate this claim from start to finish. And I mean, from when the beginning of the claim, but also when can the veteran go to his or her mailbox and receive the check from start to finish?
So every claim is different.
I know
That's
that.
part of the complexity. The 125 days.
Roughly, tell me.
I would say it's hard to say. For some of the more, if everything is in the claims folder.
Yes, everything's
we
there.
And we can go. There's also prioritization. So your claim may be ready to go, but if it's in line behind a terminally ill veteran or a homeless veteran, age
They're
85,
priority,
they're prioritized first.
and that's fine with me.
So they go
Particularly
first.
the terminally
And
ill.
if we have if you get like a lot of planes ready to land on the runway, if we have a lot of claims that are ready to go, we will do those prioritized claims first. May make your claim ready to go claim take a little longer, but some of the simpler claims could be done in a couple of weeks. Some of the more complex claims could be many months. And if we're in a position to deny a claim, it will take longer because we want to exhaust all avenues to try to say yes on that claim. Now, if a veteran does not have a confirmed diagnosis of one of the Agent Orange conditions, that would end up being a no. And other than going out and affirming whether there's a diagnosis or looking for more medical records, if the veteran doesn't have one of the presumptive conditions, looking for more records or trying to place them on the ship becomes less relevant. But we will fully develop all of our claims. It's part of our duty to assist.
Yeah, we've got to take into consideration that they've been waiting all these years, over 40 years, and I don't like, as the chair said, placing the burden on the veteran. They file the wrong claim, and they need a correct form, or file the wrong form, and they need a correct form, but they have 35 days, my understanding, is to get in the correct form. What happens if they don't get it in within 35 days?
So it's an effective date issue. It doesn't mean that they're out of,
Right.
they're out.
Do you have any leeway with those 35 days? Say they get it in 40 days.
We
They're
can
gonna
look
lose
at
their place?
postmarks. We can take a look at some things in the system. These are all handled on a case-by-case basis, sir.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. What I don't want to see is a veteran get frustrated and say, the heck with it. It's not worth it.
We don't want
Because
to see that
they earn that. So we have to go the extra mile. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, and we'll move into a second round of questions. So just to clarify the stay, and specifically talking about the Korean DMZ claims, my understanding is that you are still processing those claims for the law as existed prior to Bluewater Navy Veterans Act being passed. Is that true?
Yes, for Bluewater Navy boots on ground.
I'm
for
specifically asking about Korean
Yes,
DMZ claims. Are
if
those
there's-
still being processed during the 6-month time between June and January?
It's my understanding, yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I have a copy of a letter here from Secretary Wilkie to the Undersecretary for Benefits, and it specifically says in paragraph 3 that the board is ordered to stay decisions regarding claims for disability compensation that are based on service in or near the Korean DMZ from September 1st, 1967 to August 31st, 1971. Okay, but there's a period of time. The only thing that changed in Bluewater Navy was we added additional time. So from September 1st, 1967 to April 1st, 1968 is the new time. But this is saying stop all claims for Korean DMZ between 67 and 71. So are all of them being stopped because we only added a new time between 67 and 68? I'm
So
kind of confused.
If that is speaking to instructions to the Board of Veterans Appeals, I would have to go check with them. I would have to go verify their instructions.
So you're saying that the Secretary's guidance doesn't apply to you in this case?
I was just going from what you read there, ma'am. It's my understanding, and we'll double check. We'll verify with the claims processing side. But if we can process
So wait,
a
I mean, this
normal
is
case-
addressed to Undersecretary for Benefits. I believe that that's Dr. Lawrence who we asked to come to this hearing. Is that correct? Is that who that person is?
That's Dr. Lawrence is our undersecretary. Yes.
Okay, well, this says from Secretary 00, code 00, signed by Robert L. Wilkie to Undersecretary of Benefits. So this is a letter from Secretary Wilkie to Dr. Lawrence saying don't process any claims between September 1st, 1967 and August 31st, 1971 during the 6-month period.
We will take that back for the record, ma'am, and get you a response.
Okay, I would like
we will
clarification
dis-
on that because
we will
the
do so.
only thing added in the new legislation is the time period between September 1st, 1967 and April 1st, 1968. That's the only
We'll get
new
you a
time frame.
response.
So if I'm
You're
understanding
correct.
correctly, everything else related to Korean DMZ claims should have been processed as was already ongoing during the 6-month period. And if the case is that it has been stopped for the entire time frame, I would also like to know how many cases were infected and how many are just waiting in a queue due to this halt
We'll
in process.
validate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I now ask Mr. Boss if he would like to ask additional questions.
Yeah, and there is just a couple more. Mr. Clark, can you kind of give a detail on the contractors that are qualified, who are qualified to transcribe the information from the deck logs so it can be used as on the ship locator? You have a contracted company from, is that correct?
So, sir, if I could jump in.
Yep.
We're working with our Office of Business Process Integration, or OBIPI. They've got the lead on working with their existing scanning vendors who do our normal scanning for any paper that we get in, turning it into electrons so that we can route the work paperlessly.
Do you know which
They-
contractor that is?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the name of the contractor, sir. It's somebody I believe that
We can get
we've
it for the record.
worked, yes, we've worked with for a while. They have existing locations, high-speed scanning. We have a relationship with these folks, and they have taken the lead on working through the mechanics of that.
All right, one other thing I want to follow up on what Dr. Rowe asked before he left. You know, the other parts of this legislation, where are we at on tracking to complete the study to identify the military installations where Agent Orange was sprayed in Thailand during Vietnam era? How are we coming along with that, and are we getting that information? That's part of the legislation, right?
I will have to take that for the
you
record
take
and
it for
get
the
back
record
to
and
you,
get it
because
back
I
to
don't
us, that'd
know
be
if
great.
we've started, but we'll certainly get your response on that.
Okay, all
Mr.
right,
Boss.
because we're working on the big picture of the
Yes, sir.
legislation, but we also want to know where we're at with that.
We'll get that back to you.
Yield back.
So thank you, Mr. Boss, and thank you both for appearing today and answering questions, and we'll look forward to follow up on some of the open-ended questions that we had during the hearing. I'd like to now invite panel number 2 to come forward to the table, and while you're doing that, I'll introduce the witnesses on this panel. We have Mr. Shane Learman, the Deputy National Legislative Director of the Disabled American Veterans, Ms. Diane Robber, Executive Director of the National Organization of Veterans Advocates, and Mr. Ryan Gallucci, Director, National Veteran Services for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. So while you're taking your seats, we will get ready for questions when you are ready. So, Mr. Learman, we will start with you, and I'd like to recognize you for 5 minutes for a statement.
Thank you. Chairwoman Loria, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of DAV's more than 1 million members, we thank you for the opportunity to present our views at today's oversight hearing regarding VA's implementation of the Bluewater Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019. Our written testimony addresses all of our concerns, questions, and recommendations. However, my oral remarks will highlight just a few of these. Madam Chair, we thank you and Ranking Member Bost and all members of the subcommittee for your collective efforts in getting H.R. 299 unanimously passed through the House in May, which was approved by the Senate and signed into law by the President on June 25th. And as noted, unfortunately, Secretary Wilkie on July 1st issued a stay that stopped all processing of all benefit claims by Bluewater Navy veterans and survivors. We do not believe it was Congress's intention to prevent every single Bluewater Navy veteran from receiving Agent Orange benefits for at least 6 months. We continue to call on Secretary Wilkie and the President to lift or modify the stay on Bluewater Navy claims, especially for those most in need. Senior VA officials have stated that they will be ready to make decisions and award benefits for Bluewater Navy claims on January 1st. That means they had developed and prepared these cases in advance, which then begs the question, if VA has cases ready to grant benefits on January 1st, why can't VA grant those benefits now, particularly for those with terminal illnesses and other hardships. In reference to VA's implementation of Bluewater Navy claims, we have received limited information and little collaboration, which leads only to many more questions, such as VA ship locator tool is being created solely with the ships list provided from DoD. Of those ships, are we certain that every deck log for every ship has been provided? Are there ships that served within the determined area offshore of Vietnam that were not included? DoD has specifically excluded submarines from the ships list provided to VA, as diesel-powered submarines were used during this time, and they had to surface every 2 to 3 days to recharge their batteries and exchange fresh air. So why were diesel-powered submarines excluded from the list of U.S. ships serving in the waters offshore? We also do not know if the ship's locator tool will be available to the Board of Veterans' Appeals, especially for those legacy appeals and Appeals Modernization Act pending appeals that have been impacted by the Secretary's stay. And how will this affect the board's prohibition from developing cases? Madam Chair, in their letters to previously denied veterans, VA is providing the supplemental claim form to reestablish the claims and advising them they cannot file for a new disability on that supplemental claim form and directing them to the website for the new claim. We ask, why is the VA not satisfying their duty to notify and providing the appropriate form designated for new claims to previously denied veterans? VA regulations state that in order for a claim to be considered, it must be submitted on the appropriate claims form. In this case, either the supplemental claim or the application for disability compensation. If a veteran or survivor submits a claim on the wrong form, VA will not take action on the claim. However, VA is required to notify them and provide the correct form, but their effective date will not be protected, which means veterans and survivors can lose months of entitlements to their benefits while waiting for VA to notify them. Because it is difficult for veterans to recall the claims filed decades ago, VSOs and veterans have no other choice than to file these claims on both forms as to ensure the proper claims are filed without veterans losing entitlements or their effective dates. Unfortunately, this will create additional work for veterans, VSOs, and the VA. This issue, which applies to the entire VA claims process, has been raised multiple times with VA over the past several months. It is clear VA has no intention of changing this policy. Therefore, Congress should enact legislation to require VA to accept any new claim or previously denied claim being filed on either form. As former VA Administrator General Omar Bradley stated, we are dealing with veterans, not procedures, with their problems, not ours. Madam Chair, this concludes my testimony. I would be pleased to answer any questions you or members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Learman. I now recognize Ms. Robber for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Loria, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. We appreciate Congress's passage of the Bluewater Navy legislation and your leadership in exercising oversight authority over its implementation. NOVA members have long fought for the rights of Bluewater Navy veterans and their families, representing them before the agency, the Board of Veterans' Appeals, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. We supported Mr. Procopio's original appeal before the Federal Circuit, filing an amicus brief joined by AMVETS, MOA, PVA, and the Veterans and Military Law section of the Federal Bar Association. Before outlining specific concerns, we noted it is unfortunate VA has moved away from the more inclusive communications approach used for the AMA and chosen not to share its intentions for implementation of this legislation with the broader stakeholder community. Inclusion and collaboration is best for our nation's veterans. Turning to VA's implementation, first, VA must not use agency guidance to skirt notice and comment requirements. This legislation permits VA, notwithstanding Section 501 of Title 38, to issue guidance before prescribing regulations. We appreciate this provision is meant to give VA flexibility to adjudicate claims expeditiously. However, this provision does not authorize VA to use its manual provisions to avoid notice and comment rulemaking. Second, the Secretary's stay is over-inclusive and harmful. The Federal Circuit is reviewing the legality of the Secretary's July 1st stay. Regardless of its ultimate decision, the stay is delaying too many 1116 claims and appeals that could be granted on the existing evidence of record. For example, take the case of veteran Kiefer R., represented by a NOVA member. Mr. R. received an August 2018 BVA decision concluding he served on the USS Perry, the ship operated in the waters of Vietnam, he was aboard at the relevant times, and he suffers from multiple Agent Orange presumptive conditions. In court, the parties agreed the decision should be vacated under Procopio. Mr. R. has not received his benefits. This is just one example of many cases not filed under the new legislation that have been unnecessarily delayed by the stay. Holding these cases up is particularly harmful given the age and health of Bluewater Navy veterans. After waiting years for justice, they are now faced with a longer wait for financial relief. Even if some claims and appeals need additional development, the Secretary should ensure VBA and BVA adjudicate without further delay pending 1116 claims and appeals that can be granted on the existing record. Next, VA must ensure adequate quality control and expert assistance for scanning of deck logs. VA is currently scanning deck logs provided by National Archives. Ship deck logs are dense and largely handwritten. They consist of critical numbers that can prove whether a ship traveled in the territorial sea of the Republic of Vietnam. However, VA's digital transitions are often problematic. Veterans and advocates frequently experience delayed uploads, missing materials, mislabeling, and improper ordering when submitting documents for VA scanning. Careless scanning of these deck logs, whether through missed pages, unreadable images, or mislabeling, will result in denials to deserving veterans. Please ensure VA provides adequate quality control over the scanning process using vendors and staff who are qualified for the task. Likewise, any tool created from scanned deck logs should be developed by people with the appropriate expertise. In addition, advocates need access to VA's ship locator tool. While VA is scanning deck logs, they are unavailable to researchers. Regardless of when access is restored, all accredited attorneys, agents, and VSOs should have access to the locator tool created by VA. Such access is critical to ensure all evidence is considered and properly interpreted so claimants receive all earned benefits. Finally, VA should ensure the tool is not used to deny claimants. We're happy to hear Mr. Clark today has assured us that this will be the case. We will be following that closely. In its regulations and manual guidance, VA must clearly explain this concept and provide adequate training to the field. To Dr. Rowe's earlier point, VA guidance should also ensure that competent and credible lay evidence is given proper weight in deciding these claims and appeals. I'd like to note that NVLSP in its written testimony has advocated for specific methods of contacting veterans when letters are returned, and we'd urge you to take a look at those recommendations as well. NOVA is committed to work with Congress, VA, and fellow stakeholders to ensure Bluewater Navy veterans receive their earned benefits in a fair and timely fashion. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Robber. I now recognize Mr. Gallucci for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ranking Member Boss, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present VFW's views on implementation of the Bluewater Navy Vietnam Veterans Act. So the VFW applauds Congress for passing the act, correcting a horrible injustice for our veterans. We also thank the President for swiftly signing it into law. But we're only halfway there. Our next goal is to make sure that VA delivers timely, accurate benefits to those covered by the act. I'll address several facets of VA's rollout in my remarks, such as Secretary Wilkie's stay on claims, VA's plan to process claims, and the effects of appeals modernization on VA's workload. First, the VFW strongly disagrees with the stay on processing all claims covered under the Act. No sooner had President Trump's signature dried on the bill that Secretary Wilkie unilaterally applied his authority to stay certain claims to any claim that could be covered under the law, even claims that VA could already grant, as Chairwoman Loria pointed out, such as Korean DMZ. In partnership with Disabled American Veterans, Vietnam Veterans of America, and others, we called attention to the effects of the stay in a press conference late last month. To be clear, it's not just about denial of care, but the financial ruin that veterans would face for life-saving care that should have been paid for by VA. For survivors, months without benefits could mean losing a home or amassing debt to make ends meet. And for veterans who stand to lose their battles with these illnesses, as Dr. Rowe pointed out, why make them wait any longer? To the VFW, the stay should have meant that VA should grant what it could under Procopio in current law, but stay any claims that required either further development or denial. Secretary Wilkie must lift the stay immediately. We know that certain claims can be granted now. Waiting until January not only harms veterans, but creates an unnecessary backlog for VA at a time we can ill afford it. Furthermore, the VFW calls on this subcommittee to commission a report on the effects of the stay, asking two points. How many veterans requested expedited processing due to financial hardship or terminal illness during the stay? And how many veterans died during the stay? Next, the VFW has tried to work closely with Dr. Lawrence and his team at every opportunity to provide insight into the development of the Act. To his credit, Dr. Lawrence has been responsive to the VSOs by offering opportunities to review VA's communication plan, explaining the processes to veterans. VA must move aggressively to get this information in front of veterans, and the VFW will assist in any way that we can. VBA should also be commended for developing its ship locator tool with the National Archives and DoD, and we will look forward to a demonstration of the tool next month. However, we are concerned about the lack of formal policy guidance. We heard from our field offices that there are different interpretations of what veterans are supposed to do. In Ohio, we were advised to file 3 separate forms for veterans just to be safe. In Maine, we're tracking several veterans who filed supplemental claims only to learn they were never established. We understand that regulations will not be ready in time for January, but that's okay, because we think that VA already has the ability to process many of these claims under current authorities. However, we believe that the inconsistencies we've heard about in the field underscore the critical need for policy guidance both for VA and VSOs. VA must publish and communicate this guidance as soon as possible. Now, before this hearing, the VFW believed that VBA was heading in the right direction. As of last week, VBA reported that exams were underway and that they intended to queue claims as ready for decision while waiting for the stay to expire. I commended VA for this in my submission for the record, but now, after the previous panel, I've heard that they are not doing this. So I must question the information that we received up to this hearing today. Now, I cannot discuss Bluewater Navy without also discussing unintended consequences of the Appeals Modernization Act. In June, a coalition of VSOs asked Dr. Lawrence to look into concerns over how VA was processing forms for decision reviews, as well as the lack of applicability of intent to file for supplemental claims after 1 year, which there was ample discussion about with the first panel. To their credit, VBA did say that they reviewed the ITF issue and that we should expect a revision soon. However, VBA has yet to address the standard forms that caught the committee's attention in the previous panel. We worry that under Bluewater, this situation will only be exacerbated when veterans' claims are turned away. This is a self-inflicted wound for VBA. Section 5108 of the Appeals Modernization Act did not direct VA to create a standard form for supplemental claims. It only created a burden for veterans to furnish new and relevant evidence for VA to review that prior decision. So, we see this as only creating bureaucratic barriers for veterans. VA must address this forms issue. Since any action VA takes would only be prospective, VFW further recommends that VA report on how many veterans were affected by the AMA issues and that Congress take up legislation to award retroactive benefits to anyone whose claims were erroneously denied. 100 years ago, VFW helped our first veterans access their benefits. Today, more than 2,100 professional VFW advocates assist more than 500,000 veterans in this complex process. We know the issues, we understand the problems, and we're here to help. We hope the recommendations we have presented today will be valuable to the subcommittee and to VA in ensuring we deliver timely and accurate benefits to our veterans. Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Bost, this concludes my remarks, and I'm eager to answer any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, and thank you to all 3 of our witnesses for your opening statements. I also wanted to remark that Mr. Weidman had planned to be here today from the Vietnam Veterans of America, but due to an illness, he was not able to come as planned. So just wanted to make sure that he had intended to participate. We will now move on to questions, and I'll shift this up, and I'll let Mr. Bost do 5 minutes of questions first, and then I'll follow.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for the entire panel, just to try and kick it off. Do you believe that the VA is being collaborative and transparent in its implementation of the Bluewater Navy Veterans Act?
No, we don't. DAV does not. They have not provided us a copy of their implementation plan. They haven't showed us anything that they're planning to do outside of that one letter and all of their communications information?
No, we've not been communicated with at all. To VA's credit, during the AMA process, they were very inclusive, but it's been radio silence on this.
And Ranking Member Bost, in our prepared remarks, we did give some credit to Veterans Benefits Administration, and specifically Dr. Lawrence, for some of the information that we had provided. Unfortunately, after coming into the room today, I learned more from this statement about what VA's actual plan is in executing the Appeals Modernization Act than the pointed questions that we've asked in these meetings over the last few months. I worry that when they keep giving credit about the communication plan, that they don't fully understand what our organizations do in representing veterans in this benefits process. This isn't just about leveraging our infrastructure around the country to tell veterans about VA benefits, but literally advocating on their behalf.
Can I ask, I know, Mr. Lerman, you gave certain suggestions that you believed should be done. Are there other suggestions any of you might have that we could better get the communications open?
So, Ranking Member Bost, I'd like to touch on that because in our testimony, in our prepared remarks, I did talk a little bit about how this relationship had worked with VA over the years. It seems to be a stark departure from normal. Now to Mr. Clark and Ms. Murphy's credit, we've worked with them for a number of years and have seen a lot of transparency from Veterans Benefits Administration. I have to question why we're not receiving the type of information that we used to receive. It becomes very problematic for our folks in the field who are trying to advocate on behalf of our veterans.
Sure. This, Mr. Lerman, I've got a question for you. Your testimony stated that VA's updates to DAV about its implementation of Bluewater Navy are at times contradictory and unclear. Okay? Can you give us examples of where they were unclear, and also where do they contradict themselves?
Oh, absolutely, and it goes back to one of the points we've already been discussing this afternoon. Originally in July, when we mentioned this issue between a supplemental claim form and the actual claim for applications, what they were going to do, we were reassured at a meeting in July that they would accept any claim from a previously denied Vietnam veteran on any form that they submitted. We were assured that at the meeting. We weren't the only stakeholder there. VFW was there, several organizations. And that's where, I mean, it's contradictory. Now it's as if they never told us that, and now they're sticking only to, no, it has to be on the right form, otherwise we won't process the claim.
Okay. I think I cut you off on, you were wanting to respond back on.
Oh, well, no, I think previously, as we said, with the AMA, VA really reached out to a broader group of stakeholders outside of just the Big Six, many organizations that are actively involved in representing veterans, and we have not seen that kind of collaboration in this area. And I might just also add to what Shane just said, I think if you go back to 2015 and the real intentions behind allowing VA to require specific forms, it was not intended to ding a veteran when he's unable to submit the correct form.
Right. Okay, do any of you have suggestions on how VA can improve the outreach that they're doing right now?
I think one of the things that I suggested at the end of the testimony that's also raised by NVLSP is if you're sending out letters to veterans who were denied back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, what is happening when those letters come back and they're undeliverable? There needs to be some real intensive look at, are we really reaching the people that have been denied before?
Okay. So then I'm going to do a follow-up because I know each one of your service organizations. I know them well. And I have in my office, actually both of my offices, I actually have people who were former VSOs, processors, and it's a great advantage to have that. I've got two disabled veterans that they're like bird dogs on this. It's fantastic. But how can we, our offices, help you to make sure you get the information as quick as possible so we can turn this up? We've worked too long on this. We've worked too long on it not to be able to roll it out and roll it out right.
Actually, one of the things that, similar to what Ryan was saying, I learned more information about what was going on with this process from both committee staffs than I have from a lot of the VA and VBA briefings on how this is rolling out. We're in constant communications with both staffs. We've been getting more information from them than we've actually been getting from VBA. So sharing information with us that's important and relevant, to the point Ryan made, instead of just talking about outreach and getting the word out, we were not aware that they were going to have 8 VA regional offices handle these claims. Nobody told us that. We found that out from this committee staff. We weren't told what they were and haven't been advised any of that information. So I think what it really comes down to is they need to tell us what they're doing. They need to have open, honest conversations instead of just being worried about getting their information out for them on social media.
Okay, thank you. Time spent.
You're welcome to continue if you have further line of questioning. Well, I'll continue with, you know, a dovetail off what Mr. Learman said, is that, you know, I really sense a frustration between the VSOs who are here to help the veterans, our representatives from the VA who I feel are trying to implement what is technically a complex process of having millions of pages of deck logs implemented in a tool to put all these things together and get all the people in place. But it just seems like there's a stone wall where people are not communicating what efforts are taking place on both sides. Can you elaborate a little bit more about like what attempts have you tried to make, but any of you at the table, to gather this information and what normal lines of communication may have broken down, so perhaps we can help facilitate that?
Well, we attend regular meetings, as has been alluded to before, about just Bluewater Navy and how they're implementing it. However, a lot of the suggestions, a lot of the comments, a lot of the information we bring forward isn't followed through with, it's not implemented. We made several suggestions on how to improve their letter to veterans. Only 1 or 2 were actually made. They disregarded several of the comments that we included. And then just sharing of information. I mean, we're sitting in the room with them, but yet they haven't told us a lot of the information we just learned today. So I'm not sure where the breakdown is. We're in meetings together, but some of the significant information that was shared today just hasn't been shared with us. We're not even aware of their plan because we've never been seen it, nor has it been talked about before prior to the hearing.
Do you have something to add?
And I would agree with what Shane said there. It just seems like there's a different mindset. And again, we believe that there are a lot of hardworking advocates at Department of Veterans Affairs who do want to get this right. Again, we talk to our offices in the field about what they're hearing, and even they're reporting back contradictory guidance. It seems to be coming either from a different level, because we're seeing it across other business lines in VA. As we mentioned before, we're deeply integrated into Veterans Benefits Administration and their processes to represent veterans in the benefits process. But then other reforms like Mission Act and the community access standards, things like that, were dropped on organizations at the last minute. Still not really sure what's happening with caregiver. So the communication just isn't. It's not there, and anything this committee can do to assist in that and bring about more transparency, we certainly welcome it.
Well, just the irony looking here, I mean, you're sitting with your backs to the folks who have the answers to the questions. So, you know, please take the opportunity while you're here in the room, you know, after the hearing, to follow up with each other on some of these concerns, because I assume that there might be mutual concerns in the flow of information. So really appreciate you pointing those out. And I think that we're all on the same team, and we want to see this roll out effectively starting January 1st. We want veterans' claims to be handled as expeditiously and accurately. I think, Mr. Learman, you mentioned like getting it right the first time. As possible, because these claims are long overdue, and we want these people who've been affected by this exposure to receive the health care and benefits that they deserve, or their survivors, in the case, the very unfortunate case that they may no longer be with us. I had some other questions. I think we've covered the issue of forms. We've brought that up. It's of concern, and I think that they've indicated in the first part of the hearing that they will go back and take a look at that. And I was also going to ask a question specifically about submarines, the importance of that. How frequently have you heard that, you know, from people that you interact with? And could you just potentially amplify the importance of including, you know, submarines and submarine data in this process?
We weren't even aware they were being excluded until, again, conversations with the committee staff. We hadn't been provided the information from VA that submarines were being excluded. We've had conversations with
Can I actually interrupt for a second? Just to be clear, and I know you feel free to answer, you know, from sitting behind the witness table right now for Mr. Clark. I don't feel that they're being excluded. I just think what if my understanding is because of the nature of the deck logs, that they're not initially being included in the tool. But if someone submits a claim and they did serve on a submarine, the tool would not contain that data, so then it would go through a separate review. And you can turn around, Mr. Clark is nodding behind you. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that if anybody's watching this hearing and they did serve on a submarine, it's not being excluded. It's just that that data is not in this initial phase being incorporated into the tool, so it may take a little bit longer to do the investigating. But that person is still entitled to the same benefits, and their claim might just take a little bit longer to process.
And that's great information, and we're glad to hear it, because again, nobody has shared any of this information with us prior to the hearing.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Boss, do you have any additional questions for our witnesses?
Yeah, just that helps. So what's NOVA's position as far as the importance of VA providing adequate control over the deck logs of the scanning process? So
What we've seen in the past with all kinds of scanning procedures of VA is that often they're not as good as they should be. There's problems, there's issues. We want to be sure that there's adequate oversight over the scanning process. We believe that advocates who are properly accredited should have access to this tool that they're creating. Those deck logs for all the time that they're out being scanned are not available to researchers. We know some of our members who are working on behalf of Bluewater Navy veterans are being told, you know, these records are not accessible to you for this period of time. So we really feel that VA's electronic processing issues are well-known and need to be carefully looked at.
okay, all right. Then just kind of a follow-up to that. But it is, and I feel good about this, I hope your organizations do too, that when Mr. Clark said that, but they're not using the tool to get to know.
Yes, and that they had said that at a few meetings, and we were glad to hear him confirm that.
Okay.
We appreciate it.
And then one last one is can you describe any training that the VA has provided to your organizations so far for Bluewater Navy?
None.
None. Okay. I didn't know. Thanks.
Well, and also looking into this a little bit further, it appears that this partnership between the National Archives and the VA that will result in the scanning of these deck logs, that they will actually now be more accessible to people afterwards because the National Archives will be making them available digitally. So I know that there is a time window just because of the logistics of physically taking these deck log books to a scanning facility where they're not available. But I do get the impression that longer term, this data will now be readily available to the general public in a much faster and easier way. So I think there might be a delay right now for some people trying to do this research, but in general, in the future, I think it will be very accessible. So just wanted to point that particular thing out. So I don't have any further questions for the panel. I want to thank you again for taking time to come speak to us today, and also thank Mr. Clark and Ms. Murphy for being here, and really just look forward to the ongoing and continuing dialogue as we move forward to January 1st, and then after January 1st, to have the ability to visit and interact with one or more of these 8 sites where this processing is taking place, because I think that would be useful for the members and our committee staff. And so let's see if there's any other additional things that we should include. Mr. Boss, would you like to make any closing remarks?
No, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I think it's been productive. We do. I mean, I can't say it enough. We want this done right, and we want. It's been too long. So thank you.
So just want to reemphasize again that these veterans have waited for decades to get these benefits, and the goal of this hearing is to make sure that the VA has the resources, the personnel, conducts the training, and all of the other pieces that are required for successful implementation, so that we get this right. We want veterans who submit their claims to get an accurate review and a positive response in the case where they are entitled to these benefits the first time around. So thank you all for being here to be part of that discussion. I'd like to remind all members that they have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. This hearing is adjourned.
Okay, that's the message.
I do want to say that there's a contrast between 2 and 3 years to implement AMA and like 3 months, 4 months to implement this, so we're still figuring stuff out ourselves.
I know, and it's
good to see
good to see you. That's why I wanted to say that.